Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm reacting to Truth is One. Why so much divisiveness? Advaita versus Vishishta, Advaita versus Dvaita. I don't think I said that last one right. Advaita. Dvaita? Anyways, this looks interesting. Shankarya, Ramanuja, Madhava. I am terrible at pronouncing these things, so just let's go ahead and just give it a shot. Shankara, Ramanuja, Mahava. To this one, why so much divisiveness?
Over the centuries, followers of Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva have argued about the ultimate nature of reality, the nature of Brahman. Some of their arguments were surprisingly combative and vehement. They used sophisticated logic like a weapon to tear apart conclusions held by their opponents. And they erected fortresses of facts to defend their own positions. These scholarly battles began many centuries ago, and they continue even today. Towards the end of this presentation, we'll discuss several ways to resolve all this divisiveness. The teachings of Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva are all based on the very same foundation. They all come from the inspired discoveries of the rishis, ancient sages like Bhrigu, Vishishta, and Yajnavalkya. Their remarkable wisdom was collected in Sanskrit scriptures called Upanishads. The main Upanishads are found at the very end of each of the four sacred Vedas, so that body of wisdom has come to be known as Vedanta. Vedanta is based not only on the Upanishads, but also on the famous Bhagavad Gita and on a highly analytical text, the Brahma Sutras. But the problem is, all of these scriptures are subject to being interpreted in various ways. In the 8th century, there lived a young spiritual genius from Kerala named Shankara, also known as Adi Shankara or Shankaracharya. He interpreted those scriptures according to a strictly non-dual point of view, Advaita. Then, in the 11th century, came Ramanuja, who was a free-thinking and somewhat rebellious spiritual teacher from Tamil Nadu. He completely rejected Shankara's interpretations of the scriptures as being far too extreme, too radical. Ramanuja reinterpreted the scriptures according to his own perspective, a perspective known as qualified non-dualism, or Vishishta Advaita. Later yet, in the 13th century, came Madhva, or Madhvacharya, who was a pious monk from Karnataka. Madhva rejected the philosophically complex interpretations of both Shankara and Ramanuja, and instead he advocated a simpler interpretation of the scriptures, an interpretation based on dualism, Dvaita. Each of these great scholars wrote elaborate Sanskrit commentaries on the Upanishads, on the Bhagavad Gita, and on the Brahma Sutras. In those commentaries, they each firmly established their own interpretations and thoroughly refuted the interpretations of others. Let me try to summarize very briefly the main differences between their perspectives. First of all, Shankara taught that Brahman, the underlying reality because of which everything exists, has no attributes or qualities whatsoever. Brahman is an absolute, transcendent reality, beyond the world, beyond all creatures, and even beyond Ishvara, God, who created all this. For Shankara, the world is not as real as Brahman. It is mithya, consisting merely of names and forms, like a pot that's merely a name and form of clay. Shankara taught that Atma, the true inner self, is utterly non-separate from Brahman. When this truth goes unrecognized due to ignorance, you become subject to suffering. Liberation is gained by discovering that Atma is not separate from Brahman, and this knowledge puts an end to all suffering, both in this lifetime and thereafter. According to Ramanuja, the ultimate reality is Brahman as Lord Vishnu, who possesses limitless power and infinite divine attributes. Attributes like being creator of the world and source of blessings. Ramanuja considers the world to be as real as Lord Vishnu. The world is a material or physical aspect of Lord Vishnu, his physical body, so to speak. For Ramanuja, the inner self of each person is a tiny part of Lord Vishnu's infinite divine being. Atma is like a little glowing spark emitted by a huge blazing fire. Liberation is gained by surrendering to Lord Vishnu and reaching him after death. According to Madhva, the ultimate reality is Lord Vishnu as a personal God who is separate from the world and its beings. Madhva famously taught 5 kinds of separateness or difference. Difference between material things. Difference between material things and Atma, or soul. Difference between material things and Lord Vishnu. Difference between individual souls. And difference between each soul and Lord Vishnu. For Madhva, liberation is gained through intense devotion. Devotion that invokes Lord Vishnu's grace and saves you from suffering in one life after another.
So this is... Let me remove that real quick. So my how I understand it, or no, how I choose to understand it so far is, I do believe in this so far, as in, you know, much like the clay, this world is made out of these, whatever these tiny atoms that creates existence. It is existence. It doesn't create it. It is existence. Without this, it does not exist. So, and these things do not have attributes. We create the attributes to them, kind of like, you know, we form clay into a pot or to a spoon. It's form and function, as I've said. So I do believe in that, I think, if I understood it correctly. Now, the world, I think I like this one, because it's still real, because it's made out of Brahman. And this is something that I believe in my belief would be a better push for people. To say that the world is Maya or an illusion, in my opinion, I don't know if that really helps, and perhaps maybe I'm looking at it from a Western perspective, and yeah, probably from that. Even in my own too. Now, the Atman, or the self, well, obviously if the self exists, which it does, it's made out of Brahman, so therefore it is not separate. Nothing is separate from Brahman, from, again, my own way of life or perspective. Moksha, liberation, knowledge, gnanam. I guess that's actually jnana. Again, it's just knowledge. I kind of like Swami Vivekananda's method a lot better, where it doesn't matter whether it's knowledge, devotion, action, or meditation. All those equally can get you to liberation. Um, Obviously, like Vivekananda has said, it's better to have all of them because we do all of them, just to a little degree. We can expand on one, which is what we're the strongest at, or we can expand on all. It's good to do all, but if you're stronger in one, then do that one. Bhakti being, in my opinion, the easiest, which seems like very similar to the other two, Dvaita and Vishishta Advaita. Surrendering or bhakti, devotion to God, and grace, again, devotion to God. So far mine is no attributes, real, non-separate, and this one's more for Swami Vivekananda, where it's just that knowledge alone doesn't have to be that, but it is one of the ways of liberation. Again, I love the fact that Vivekananda says, you know what, any path is fine so long as you're genuine and trying to achieve it. The four paths: karma, bhakti, jnana, and raja.
That's a lot of information. To make it a bit easier to grasp, here's a simple way to visualize these three different perspectives. In Advaita Vedanta, Brahman alone exists. All else is merely name and form. In Vishishta Advaita, Lord Vishnu exists along with the material world and individual souls, all of which are parts or aspects of Lord Vishnu, parts that are not separate from him. In Dvaita Vedanta, Lord Vishnu exists along with the material world and individual souls, all of which are completely separate or different from each other and from Lord Vishnu.
Interesting. Again, yeah, the middle one. Absolutely.
Now, this comparison is extremely brief, and it omits many important details about each of the three teachings. Not only that, but it completely omits several other kinds of Vedanta that are perhaps less prominent, but they're equally important. They're based on other interpretations of the scriptures, interpretations by Yadava Prakasha, Nimbarka, Vallabha, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Obviously, we can't discuss all their teachings here, but that's really not the purpose of this presentation. The purpose is to understand why the followers of Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva have argued so stridently with each other over the ages. Why is there so much divisiveness among them?
This kind of makes it seem like there's just so many different interpretations of the scriptures, which is pretty obvious. We are human after all, and each of us experience things differently. So one word could be spoken in a room, and there's 100 people, and it can be interpreted 100 different ways. Just one word, 100 different interpretations of that one word. And I guess the only person who genuinely knows the interpretation of that one word is the one that created it. So the original writers of the Upanishads, or the I can't remember, the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. So, and then anything after those writings are going to be just interpretations of those writings. I don't know if you can really say that even the person that was there witnessing the writing of it, and the teacher that's teaching it, the one that's writing and teaching it to the student directly, even that student will have a misinterpretation of it, just because, again, we are human, we all have biases, and I mean, it's very difficult to be unbiased in anything. And even, like I said, even for that one student, there's probably even just a minute amount of misinterpretation, a period misplaced, or a word not quite translated or meant the way it was said. Because, again, how you put inflections on words completely changes the sentence. You can say this exactly. You could repeat the sentence, but how you say those words in those sentences could put in a different meaning than what was originally intended. And I mean, and that's what it seems like is going on over here. Perhaps again, I'm not too sure, but it's very much true just in everyday life. There are some people, you say one word, half the people get offended, half the people it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. What? So this is the thing that we have to understand our biases, and I guess this is the reason why I do like Hinduism. It's just the sheer fact that I think my take on this is the fact that so long as you're going for genuine truth, whether it be even your own alone, so long as it's not harmful to other people and you're seeking the truth and you're not pushing your ideas on other people, I think that's very valid. Regardless of almost how you interpret the books, if you're becoming enlightened because you misinterpret the books, but you're not spreading it, unless people want to learn your ways, and so long as it's genuinely trying to find enlightenment, I don't think you can be wrong. I mean, obviously, if you misinterpret, misinterpreting is not necessarily meaning that you're leading the wrong path. You're not following the path of that book. Absolutely, you have your own path that you somehow stumbled upon by reading that book. Again, I think ultimately, probably Hinduism is just the ultimate seeking of the truth, regardless of the path that you take. Whether it be Advaita Vedanta, Vishishta Advaita, or Dvaita. I don't know how to pronounce the last one. Dvaita? I'm probably mispronouncing everything anyway, so there we go. My own interpretation of the mispronunciation of those words. But yes, so this is how I guess I'll look at it. Hinduism. It's just, there's no, Advaita is not the right way. But it is the right way. But it's not the right way. It's the right way for some, not the right way for others. And that's the beauty of it. It's so open to whatever way works for you. And it's just genuinely seeking the truth.
In general, divisiveness of any kind can be harmful. Divisiveness between racial, social, and religious groups has led to terrible problems in the world. Problems like discrimination, terrorism, and war. Divisiveness between liberals and conservatives here in the United States has weakened our social fabric and even threatens to destroy the unity of our nation. And divisiveness among the followers of Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva can result in harm to modern spiritual seekers. How? Let me tell you a story. Decades ago, I used to teach at my guru's ashram in Pennsylvania. One day, after I finished teaching a class, a young woman from an Indian family approached me and said, "These teachings are wonderful. I wish my parents could come here." I asked, "Where do your parents live?" She said, "Not far, but they would never come here." "Why not?" I asked. She said, "Because my parents come from a traditional Vaishnava community in Tamil Nadu." She went on to explain that before coming to the U.S., her parents used to attend lectures by teachers from the Vishishta Advaita tradition of Ramanuja. In those lectures, her parents were strictly warned to always avoid the teachings of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta.
That sounds so much like Abrahamic religion, where nope, this is the one true religion. This is what you should follow. Don't listen to the others; those are blasphemous. Again, this is the reason why I like Hinduism, because there is no one right path for everyone. There is a right path, and every path is different for everyone. There could be a few people that have the same path, for sure. People who follow Advaita Vedanta. Everyone that's led up to their liberation. I mean, my gosh, that's one path that works for a lot of people. But it doesn't work for everyone. If one person is like, I'm not getting this, it's not working, what's going on? I mean, they stay stuck like that for all their lives. They're not going to get liberation because they're trying to force themselves into a path that they don't know how to follow or that's not right for them.
Another example of this kind of divisiveness is found in ISKCON, the organization of the modern Hare Krishna movement. ISKCON is associated both with Madhva's Dvaita Vedanta and with the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Teachers and members of ISKCON often vilify Shankara, accusing him of being a Mayavadi, one who claims that God is a mere illusion.
Interesting. I've heard people in the comments talk about that group, but again, I'm open to hearing what they have to say, whether it makes sense or not. I mean, you could hate me for that or not, but again, this is the reason why I believe that the problem with saying, oh, that group is this or that, let every individual person determine that for themselves. Don't hate them because maybe they like some of the things they've said or not. Because that's very much going into, I guess, the problems going on in the United States, the problems with Abrahamic religion, where they say, don't follow that group. That group is terrible. It's nothing but lies and all that. It's like, well, let me determine that for myself. And for me, it's not necessarily to say that, sure, they could have some bad things, like, well, I don't agree with that. That's fine. And there's like, oh, I agree with that. That doesn't make me a complete follower of that. There are a lot of things that people say that you can agree with and disagree with and not hate the person. I think hating a group of people or a group just because they are hateful, I suppose you could say, is kind of perpetuating this hate. I guess a great example would be ISKCON, I guess, if I said it correctly, where they're talking about Shankara, if I said his name correctly, down talking him. It's like, oh, he's a fool or something like that. I'm not sure if that's what they said. It's just the idea is there. But if you don't talk to this other people, try to how do I say, change their minds, it's that hate will forever be there. It goes back to a person called Daryl Davis in the United States. He's a black person who goes into people who want black people dead. Let's just put it that way. The KKK. And he has changed so many people's minds because of the actions he's done. So you want to stop hate, that's the way to do it. Just showing kindness and be understanding. Obviously, don't be a fool. The reason why I say this is because there are some people who consider Daryl Davis as a fool because he's been taken advantage of by some KKK members. But again, the kindness that he showed, even by being taken advantage of, I mean, that's next level in my opinion. Obviously, you have to draw a line somewhere, though. You can't keep being the fool there. But at the same time, if you don't push beyond the first few times, you may never be able to change a person's mind. But that's one thing I appreciate about Daryl Davis, is going into enemy territory and converting so many of those who actually hate him because of the color of his skin, and they're no longer like that. You talk about killing the head of the Hydra, the Hercules mythology. That's the way to do it. Hercules would chop off the head of Hydras and two would grow in its spot. And that's kind of like how a lot of modern people, I think, try to solve their problems by cutting off the head, but all it does is it creates more and more hatred in the world. Daryl Davis does it the right way, where in terms of Hercules, he bashes the head and he doesn't cut it, or he cauterizes it so that heads cannot grow back. I mean, he doesn't do it like violently. Obviously, he does it by just proving to them that what they think of him is wrong. So, and it's very hard to do. What he does, not I would say there's very few people in the world that'll do that, and I'm sure Sadhguru, a lot of the gurus and swamis are like him, or sorry, they're a lot alike, that they can look past the hatred and can take a beating in terms of hating and taking advantage of them to prove to them that they're genuinely nice people and their perspective of them is wrong. And that's what Daryl Davis has done, and I'm sure that's what a lot of other gurus and swamis have done to change the mind of people. It's very difficult, it's not guaranteed, but it's a permanent way to end that hatred.
These examples are not meant to criticize anyone, but rather to show how spiritual seekers are sometimes restricted or prohibited from freely searching for answers to their questions in Hinduism's vast ocean of spiritual wisdom. That kind of freedom is actually central to the Hindu tradition. After all, Hinduism allows you to worship any form of God, any form you choose. Hinduism also allows you to worship God in many ways, with or without a particular form, in a temple or on a home altar, in a sacrificial fire, or even in nature. The Hindu tradition acknowledges that every person is different and has different religious preferences and different spiritual needs. This recognition is a central principle of Hinduism, a principle called Adhikari Bheda, the Bheda or difference between adhikaris, spiritual seekers. We'll come back to this important point later. The fact is, many religious organizations discourage or even prohibit their members from exploring teachings that lie outside the beliefs and doctrines they officially accept. These organizations often claim that such prohibitions are necessary to protect their members by shielding them from conflicting ideas and harmful influences that could cause confusion or dissension.
And this is a way of excuse me. And this is a way of creating an echo chamber too, which is a problem. Again, even outside of religion, that's happening. And this is, I guess you could say something my friend said, which is very much true. Is that even if you get rid of religion, other people will find other ways to make arguments for other stuff. It's not religion's the problem, it's people. Their beliefs, their strong beliefs of whatever it is that they believe in, that everyone else must follow.
Perhaps that's true in some situations. But it's also likely that those prohibitions are actually intended to protect the organizations, not their members. Most organizations want to grow stronger, so naturally they want to retain their members and discourage any of them from leaving. So, does this explain the apparent divisiveness among followers of Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva who have criticized each other so vehemently? Are they, like modern religious organizations, trying to protect themselves or shield their students from different ideas? Somehow, that seems very doubtful. For example, consider Madhva himself, who once criticized Shankara as being a Prachanna Bauddha, a Buddhist in disguise. Was his criticism really for the sake of restricting his students or protecting his organization? Well, it seems much more likely that Madhva, being such a wise teacher, would have fully embraced the principle of Adhikari Bheda. So he would have clearly understood that his teachings of Dvaita Vedanta would be helpful for some students, but not for everyone. For this reason, it seems extremely unlikely that a great saint like Madhva would want to intellectually restrict his students or keep them from leaving, as do many modern religious organizations. Then why did Madhva apparently condemn Shankara as being a Buddhist in disguise? Well, all great scholars like Madhva frequently use a powerful teaching technique known as Purva Paksha Siddhanta. It's a bit like the devil's advocate position, sometimes used in arguments. Purvapaksha means an opposing point of view. It's a contrary perspective that a teacher deliberately introduces into a discussion. After showing the merits of the opposing point of view, the teacher then thoroughly refutes it by showing all of its defects. Defects like logical errors and erroneous assumptions. In this way, the teacher establishes the siddhanta, the final conclusive point of view, and endows it with much more strength and clarity. This technique uses comparison and contrast in an extremely effective manner. Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhva, and their followers all made frequent use of Purvapaksha Siddhanta. They did so not to criticize opposing teachings, but to strengthen and clarify their own. This technique is widely used in texts, in commentaries, and even in lengthy arguments that span several centuries. A famous example of this began when a brilliant follower of Madhva named Vyasatirtha wrote a text in which he meticulously refuted Shankara's Advaita. In response, one of the greatest teachers in Shankara's lineage, Madhusudana, wrote his famous Advaita Siddhi, in which he refuted, line by line, everything written by Vyasatirtha. Then, a disciple of Vyasatirtha wrote a powerful rebuttal to Advaita Siddhi, and later that rebuttal was itself thoroughly refuted by a disciple of Madhusudana. My own guru often used this technique. When he would introduce other religious or spiritual teachings and discuss their shortcomings, some listeners would get upset. They felt, how could this great teacher of Advaita Vedanta be so antagonistic towards others? But his criticisms were never directed at people. He was criticizing their ideas that he used as purvapakshas to strengthen and clarify his own teachings.
Kind of interesting how it says criticize the ideas, but people got offended, even though he's not talking about them. He's talking about the idea, and how ideas become so personalized that they identify as the idea as well, which is something I know Sadhguru talks about, how removal of identities, which is very much so the problem, that when you follow so strongly with an idea, you don't want it to ever be wrong because you're following it. People don't want to be wrong, I guess, in general too.
The point here is that when truly great teachers criticize other points of view, their goal is not to be divisive or condemn others, nor is it to intellectually restrain their students or keep them from leaving. Instead, their goal is to teach with as much clarity as possible. But I have to admit that not all teachers live up to this lofty standard. Some teachers really feel that their teachings are the best, the most correct, and that all other teachings are somehow defective. Even in my own lineage, I sometimes hear such sentiments. To me, it sounds like Vedantic chauvinism.
In this video, they have orange palms as well, much like the other video I just did of his. So what does that signify?
Okay, this has been quite a serious discussion, so let's lighten it up a bit with a story that shows how we can reconcile the teachings of Advaita, Vishishta Dvaita, and Dvaita. It's a story about 3 sadhus, 3 monks who were trained in the lineages of Madhva, Ramanuja, and Shankara, respectively. One day they went to the seashore. Standing in the sand, the first sadhu, who was a follower of Madhva, said to the others, "Look at the vast ocean. See how every wave is born from the ocean, sustained by the ocean, and eventually returns to the ocean." That's exactly how Madhva described the relationship between individual souls and Lord Vishnu. And see how each wave is different from all the others, and different from the ocean itself. That's like Madhva's famous doctrine of difference. And see how waves depend on the ocean for their existence, but the ocean exists independent of the waves. That's like Madhva's teaching that every soul depends on Lord Vishnu for its existence, but the Lord himself is independent of his creation. The other 2 sadhus listened carefully. Then the second sadhu, a follower of Ramanuja, described the ocean quite differently. He said, "I understand your perspective, but as you can see, every single wave is a small part of the ocean. The vast ocean possesses countless waves, just like Lord Vishnu possesses countless divine attributes, as Ramanuja said. And each wave is a tiny part of the vast ocean, just like each soul is a tiny spark of Lord Vishnu's infinite divinity. All the waves are attributes or aspects of the ocean, just like the world and souls are all various aspects of Lord Vishnu, as Ramanuja taught us." After a long pause, the third sadhu, a follower of Shankara, said to the others, "What each of you said doesn't make any sense to me." "What?" they exclaimed. "Don't you see all the waves?" "What waves are you talking about?" he said. "Don't you see the ocean?" they asked. "What ocean?" he said. "Then what do you see?" they asked. "Water," he said. "I see only water. Here there is water alone, just like Shankara said that all that exists is Brahman alone." The 3 sadhus on the beach went on arguing late into the night. Who do you think won the argument? None of them. Each sadhu was right from his own perspective. All 3 explanations were correct from their respective points of view. Arguing about which is right or wrong ends up being counterproductive. As long as the sadhus continued to argue, they couldn't enjoy the beauty of the vast ocean. The same is true for arguments about Advaita, Vishishta Advaita, and Dvaita. Each of these 3 can be considered correct from its own point of view. Arguing about them only entangles you in a web of words and logic that ultimately prevents you from appreciating the beauty of the absolute reality, however you might consider it.
I guess this is something that I said in the end of one video where, whether there is just one consciousness or is there many individual consciousness, all separate from each other. I have one, you have one, he has one. But the whole point, I guess for me, is that I don't think it I don't think it really matters whether you believe there's one or individual. I can only say it from my perspective, and people can say it from their own perspective. It's kind of, there's no real way to prove it, I don't believe. Just because, again, like I said, just because we experience the same blankness doesn't necessarily mean it's the same blankness. So this is my argument for the multiple consciousness. But at the same time, I'm not going to sit there and argue. It's like, oh no, there's multiple consciousness, there's not one. It's irrelevant to enlightenment. Whatever path works for you, works for you. I will say that's what I believe, that there are multiple consciousness, and that's it. I mean, you can argue all day long until you can, I don't know how you'd prove it to me, but, if that's what you want to believe, I'm not going to fight you over it. But perhaps maybe some texts or some words from other gurus and swamis can convince me otherwise, but I'd have to experience that. So far, my experience is that I have my own. I don't know if anyone else's. And much like how we experience the world differently, my blankness experience could be different from someone else's. Just because everyone seems to describe it the same, is it really the same? We don't know. Maybe that's the limitation of the words that we have, or the experiences that we have. We can't discern different types of blankness just because we never really have to describe it. It's only seems to be one way of describing it. Again, these are just all, thoughts out there, just to make you think a little bit, if there's even any thinking that needed to be involved. But yeah, again, for me, in my opinion, there's no real way of knowing, so it's in a sense irrelevant. But I have my belief based on my experience, and that's about it. I mean, if you choose to believe that and that gets you enlightenment, that's great. If you choose not to believe that and there's only one consciousness and you get enlightenment, that's great. That's ultimately the purpose, is to find enlightenment regardless of what you believe.
Now, to conclude this presentation, I'd like to share with you a personal theory about how these three different Vedantic perspectives came about in the first place. Since it's just my personal theory, you don't have to accept it as being true. Also, please remember that I've been trained in the teachings of Advaita, so my perspective will naturally be biased. This theory is based on the fact that among the three major Vedantic teachings, Advaita historically came first, followed by Vishishta Dvaita, and later yet by Dvaita. To me, it makes sense that Advaita came first, since it seems to most accurately represent the overall intent of the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutras. No doubt you can find many passages in those scriptures, especially in the Bhagavad Gita, that support Vishishta Advaita and Dvaita. But when you take those scriptures as a whole, their main focus really seems to be Advaita. Yet the teachings of Advaita are extremely lofty and can be quite difficult to grasp. As a result, these teachings can remain beyond the reach of many sincere spiritual seekers. Now, consider this. The goal of every teacher is not just to teach, but to teach in a way that's helpful to his or her students. I can imagine teachers long ago struggling to convey the highest, most elusive teachings of Advaita and completely failing to make their students understand. Some teachers would probably try to make their teachings more accessible, easier for their students to grasp. They might have modified or revised their teachings, creating what's now known as Vishishta Advaita. But even Vishishta Dvaita could be too difficult for some students to fully comprehend, so later teachers might have simplified it even further, creating the teachings we now call Dvaita. By saying all this, I don't mean to suggest that Advaita is superior to the other two, or that Dvaita is inferior in any way. It would be ridiculous to suggest that calculus is superior to algebra, or that multiplication is inferior to them both. These are different subject matters, and each subject matter is intended to meet the needs of different students. And that brings us back to the important principle of adhikari bheda, the difference of spiritual seekers. Advaita, Vishishta Dvaita, and Dvaita can be understood as being intended for three different groups of seekers. Each is meant to meet the spiritual needs of all those who can fully comprehend and benefit from its teachings. But none of this suggests that one teaching is better than another. After all, the ultimate purpose of these three teachings is not to impart philosophical or spiritual principles. Their purpose is to address the problem of human suffering. And all three can most certainly bless their followers with tremendous spiritual growth and inner peace.
Okay. So yeah, and I think that's kind of what I'm trying to do a little bit. I guess I'm dumbing down the things that I'm hearing so that I can better understand it and that I can kind of throw it out there, my interpretation of it. And again, this is the reason why I say that like Hinduism is the fact that everyone can interpret things a little bit differently, whether it's right or wrong. I guess the only wrong way is if you're not seeking the absolute truth, and you're not making your way through to get enlightenment. If you're going further away from enlightenment, then you're doing it wrong. That's for sure, without a doubt. But you know, it's kind of weird to say misinterpretation of the scriptures, because that would indicate of something doing wrong. Each of them interpreted the scriptures a little bit differently, but it almost seems like they've kind of interpreted it the best way they can so that they can spread the word of it. And that's kind of something I'm kind of doing, I suppose, as I'm listening to this and relating it to my personal experience and my personal knowledge of what I know about the world. Again, I'm not saying I know everything about the world, it's just what I've experienced in the world, and that's my personal knowledge. And how to perhaps better portray it, I suppose. I'm not sitting there spreading the word of it at all, just merely getting a few things here that seems to be reasonable that I can tell to someone should someone ask. Which is almost no one at the moment. But yeah, again, this is mostly my interpretation, how I can follow it, how I create my own version of it in a sense that leads me to be, I won't say enlightened, but at least less suffering. That's the best way I can put it. And watching all these videos, I've learned a lot and I've gained quite a lot. I'm by no means perfect. I still do feel emotions, especially the strong ones, and still identify with certain things, I suppose, but not so strongly. So I've gotten better at it, but I'm not perfect at it. I don't think I'll ever be, but I've accepted that, and I think perhaps that might be one of the key things, is the fact that some of the teachings that the gurus and swamis that I've watched acknowledges the fact that you will still feel those things. You'll still feel them. You'll feel your emotions, you'll feel the pain and all of that. But being able to acknowledge it as a way of, like a acknowledge of separation. It's like, yeah, this is me, this is my emotion, we're separate, I see it, I understand it. And I think that ultimately is the one of the paths. It's the fact that if you're able to separate yourself from the identities, emotion, or whatever it may be, that is one step closer. And that's what I've been trying to do. But yeah. But anyways, I think that's all I have to really say about it. Again, just having that separation between your emotions, your thoughts, your actions, and all of that. Although I said this, it's very difficult for me to separate my actions because that is my true self deciding to do something. Whether my true self is affected by it or not, it is still a choice that I made. So, and that's, I guess, the one thing I've said a long time ago, that's very difficult for me to separate because I don't think I'd want to. Because that might have a different implication in mind. So my actions have always been, I chose to do that, but my emotions in terms of how people reflect upon me or reflect upon my works and my doings, that I can separate because, you know, if it's happiness, that's great. If it's sadness, that's whatever. If it's anger, I'm able to separate myself from that because these are emotions created by the body. But the actions that I do is something that I chose to do, so I have direct control over that. My emotions, my body, whether you have control over it or not, you can, if you have control over it, that's great. If you don't have control over it, understand that's a reactive thing of your body that you didn't choose to do, but your mind, your emotions kind of partaked in it, and then you just have to understand that that's not you. But the actions, on the other hand, that is something, like I said, that something that you chose to do. Your thoughts, very much, you know, your mind thinks of whatever it wants to think of. It's always thinking or whatever. You can separate yourself from that. So I think that's ultimately, I'm refining how I think. Again, separation from bhakti, jnana, but karma is one I think perhaps I refuse to separate myself from because I am actively choosing to do things. Your thoughts, your active thoughts, not the one that's reactive. Like if you look at something and all of a sudden it just brings up memory, that's different. More along the lines of you see something and then you actively think about it. You see someone, you either choose to do something or not about it. That is what I'm talking about. Not when you look that way, all of a sudden just a freaking memory comes up like, oh wow, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have thought about that. You know, not that. That's reactive, I suppose. Anyways, that's my reaction to Truth is One, Why So Divisive, Advaita, Vishishta, Advaita, and Dvaita. Dvaita. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.